We've got a lot going on. We're going to begin this morning with the increasing pressure on the Trump administration to release files related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The president posted on social media last night that he's directed his attorney general, Pam Bondi, to produce what he calls pertinent testimony tied to the Epstein case. Earlier on Thursday, the White House said it would not appoint a special counsel to review the case. In a new development here, the Wall Street Journal has published a story. It says that more than 2 decades ago, President Trump wrote a letter to Jeffrey Epstein that reportedly included an outline of a naked woman and a Donald signature. This was part of a bunch of letters for a birthday. The president has denied writing the letter, calling it fake and threatening to sue the paper. The Journal story says that Mr. Trump was asked to contribute to this collection of letters that Epstein's then confidant Ghislaine Maxwell was planning to give to Epstein for that birthday. NBC News has not independently verified that or seen the letter. Meanwhile, we're also learning more about the president's medical diagnosis. He has a condition that causes blood to pool in his legs. The White House addressed the condition yesterday during its press briefing.
This concern was thoroughly evaluated by the White House medical unit. The president underwent a comprehensive examination, including diagnostic vascular studies. Bilateral lower extremity venous Doppler ultrasounds were performed and revealed chronic venous insufficiency. Importantly, there was no evidence of deep vein thrombosis or arterial disease.
We'll have much more ahead this hour on President Trump's medical diagnosis, as well as that latest victory in Congress. But let's begin with NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. We're going to start with the latest in the Epstein controversy. Vaughn, good morning. So first, let's start with this Wall Street Journal article. It was published last night. This is this letter they say President Trump allegedly wrote to Jeffrey Epstein. In a phone interview with the Journal, the president denied writing that letter. We know he's also threatening legal action in response, something we've seen him do before, of course, to press. What more can you tell us?
Right. This is a president that has a deep history of denials. He says that this letter was not written by him, and the caricature of the woman's body that is described in this Wall Street Journal story was not drawn by him. The Wall Street Journal moved forward with the publication of this, despite, as they say, on Tuesday night, they talked directly with the president, who threatened to sue them if they moved forward with publishing their reporting here. The Wall Street Journal is outlining not criminal activity by the president, to be clear, but suggesting that as part of the files that the Department of Justice has, as it pertains to its longstanding investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, that there are files that had not been publicly made available at this point in time that pertain to the now president. At the same time, the Department of Justice has made it clear that they had released previously all information that was relevant, what they say, to any criminal investigations. That is longstanding practice to not release evidence that does not directly implicate anybody in a direct indictment. And so there is a question here moving forward as to what other references there may be in files related to the president, who had a lengthy relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But again, it's a question of what may amount to just simply evidence of a relationship, but that is not any that would not contribute to any allegation of criminal wrongdoing by the president.
Vaughn, the president said, though, he's not planning to appoint a special counsel to review the Epstein case. We heard that from his press secretary. It's something that even some of his allies, quite a few actually, had advocated for. How close do you think we are to seeing any files related to Epstein become public? Are there any legal obstacles in the way? Do you see the White House changing course at all as people, members of his own party, supporters of his, continue to call for this?
Right. The legal obstacles are not wanting to taint anybody who, again, the Department of Justice did not seek to bring criminal charges against. That there may be individuals that provided witness testimony that was unable to be corroborated, that DOJ prosecutors ultimately decided not to bring charges against because they didn't have a body of evidence that they found that would amount to worthy of criminal charges. And of course, the DOJ and the FBI have outlined that there were more than 1,000 victims of Jeffrey Epstein, and there are sensitive details that have been redacted about Jeffrey Epstein's dealings and relationships, not wanting to reveal the identities of those victims or difficult details from the evidence that was gathered. These are not just grand jury testimony, which Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, indicated last night at the request of the president she will seek to unseal and release. But this is a question also of other records that may be on hand here. And of course, this is all part of now many years in the making, an effort by those particularly on the right, allies of the president, to have more records of Jeffrey Epstein involved, but not under the scope that President Trump, would be implicated in any of this. There was a belief that there was a great cabal of celebrities and high-ranking Democrats that were associates of Jeffrey Epstein and would be found to be a part of this ring and a part of this illegal activity that Jeffrey Epstein had engaged in.
Vaughn, also, I do want to ask you quickly about the president's health. He's been diagnosed with what's called chronic venous insufficiency. What are we learning from the White House about the condition and how it might impact his day-to-day work?
This was acknowledged yesterday by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt after it was documented in that photo that you're seeing here this week, the president with swollen ankles. This is when the valve is around in the lower legs have difficulty sending blood back up to the heart. This is also coming after several months of photos have shown the president with bruises on his hands, and earlier this week it included makeup appearing to cover up one of the bruises. The White House saying that that was caused by aspirin to address cardiovascular concerns that the president was taking, and from handshakes with the aspirin, a blood thinner, causing those bruises here. The White House says that there are not any more serious symptoms for the president, that he is not taking any other steps outside of taking the aspirin for this cause here. But at the same time, this is acknowledged by the White House after the questions about these images here came out, Savannah.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much for joining us on this, covering a lot for us this morning. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel on this. Dr. Patel, good morning. So this is being called a common condition, especially for someone of the president's age. A lot of people, though, might not have heard of this chronic venous insufficiency. First, just explain what it is, if you don't mind. Vaughn did a good job, showed those pictures, kind of like what it can present as. But what exactly is going on in the body?
Savannah, he did indeed. It is a chronic, common condition. About 1 in 20 Americans actually have this diagnosis, especially after the age of 50. And what it really involves are the veins. The veins are the big pipes in your body that bring blood back to your heart. And because of gravity, the way we sit, the way we stand, they have these valves that are pretty tough that go one way, always to bring the blood back to your heart. Over time, and associated especially with obesity, high blood pressure, and some other common metabolic conditions, those valves can become very weak, and blood can, unfortunately, go the reverse direction and pool. And that's why you see that swelling around the legs and ankles. Again, very common and a chronic progressive condition.
And what's the treatment for this? How does it impact someone's life?
Right. So the treatment depends on the stages. Let's just assume, just based on what the president's physician reported and the pictures that we have, that this is probably in the early to moderate stages. This is right at the time where you would do very conservative therapy, things like compression stockings. Normally, I would tell patients to try to elevate their legs and then to try to ambulate, not to sit for prolonged periods of time. Try telling that to an active president. So in addition to this, he might be evaluated. There are medical interventions, everything from prescription pharmaceutical drugs all the way to more intensive therapies that can be done, laser therapy, surgeries. But it doesn't seem like the president's condition is advanced enough to merit that. But treatment options abound.
I want to ask you also about those bruises on the president's hand that have been seen, and then also those questions that Vaughn had just mentioned there about makeup that it looked like was covering them. Again, the president's 79 years old. I think people have seen those types of markings on the back of somebody who's a little bit older's hand. But is this related? Does that seem serious?
No, the two are unlikely related. And by the way, anybody over the age of about 60 who's ever had an IV in their hand, this is exactly what their hands look like. And it can last, by the way, bruising can last for weeks. And so hard to know kind of what exactly caused it. Certainly taking a low dose of aspirin, as they expressed the president is doing, can certainly make that worse. But it is something that overall isn't shocking, but not related to the venous insufficiency.
And doctor, does any of these things, the venous insufficiency, what we were just discussing with the hands, does any of it make you kind of like concerned the bigger picture of the president's health overall, or does this seem kind of unsurprising to you given his age?
So the bigger picture is overall not concerning. The fact that he has chronic venous insufficiency does not automatically correlate to something life-threatening like sudden cardiovascular disease. However, given his age, given the fact that we know between weight, age, lifestyle, that none of this is shocking. And I would just say that these are all things that if this were any patient of mine with the exact same conditions would merit kind of lifestyle changes. Again, how do you do that as the president of the United States? I do think that it would be nice to see more complete records with the numbers, with some of these kind of underlying metabolic assumptions that the president's physician just put in kind of a shorter statement. I think that would reassure everybody and also give us a little bit more of a picture into what is likely a normal aging process for a 79-year-old. But again, these are things that should be monitored. They can lead to more serious conditions, and we'll just be watching over time.
Dr. Patel, really good insight. Thank you so much. Well, in a victory for the president on Capitol Hill, the House passed legislation requested by Mr. Trump to rescind funding for foreign aid and also public broadcasting. So House Republicans approved this bill. It actually claws back a total of $9 billion. It includes about $1 billion from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That is what funds NPR and PBS. The other $8 billion there comes from cuts to foreign aid, and the bill now heads to President Trump's desk. We have NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin. Here's the twist, though. She's in studio with us. Julie, good morning. Great to have you here in New York with us. So first, just walk us through how this bill passed and talk about the impact of what is being cut here.
Yeah, Savannah, so good to be in studio with you. There was a very late night on Capitol Hill. I was not there. I was traveling here,
yeah,
but our colleagues covered this vote, and we keep getting used to these late nights on the Hill because President Trump is putting so much pressure on Republicans to get his agenda done. So what this package does is exactly what you laid out. Congress appropriates funds. They have the power of the purse. In this very unusual case, the president and the executive branch asked them to essentially claw that money back to undo the money they already appropriated. So now you have these $9 billion in cuts for foreign aid programs with the WHO, the USAID, the UN. PEPFAR, though, was saved from this program, about $400 million. Republicans told the president they're not going to agree to cut, and that was, of course, signed into law by President Bush in 2003 and had tremendous success. But there are still real concerns about the cuts Congress did make in this package. 2 Republicans voted against it in both the Senate and the House, Savannah. And this is not the last package that the president's going to request Congress to cut.
And remind everyone what PEPFAR is and why we think that survived.
So PEPFAR is the program that protected millions from contracting HIV and AIDS. It protected the kids and the children of people who had it. And this was such a successful program. It is actually billed as the most successful global health program ever. And we already saw some controversy surrounding it with the Republicans in Congress delaying approving the funds for it because of some abortion concerns, especially in Africa. And so now you have this situation where some Republicans push back successfully to save it. But again, this is not the end of the road for these rescissions. The administration is going to keep asking Congress to do more to try and cut into some of the deficits they say we have.
Switching gears, Julie, yesterday we had talked about, I think it was yesterday, about this, it's been a long week, this hearing for this controversial judicial nominee for President Trump. And we did see yesterday some Senate Democrats stage these walkouts here. Tell us about this.
This was so unusual. I actually had to look up on my screen when I saw Cory Booker speaking and Chuck Grassley, the top Republican, talking over him. Democrats really tried to slow walk the nomination of Emil Bovee. He's somebody who's been close to the president. He was his defender in court during some of his prosecutions, especially in New York. And so he is somebody that Democrats said is not qualified for this job. He's somebody who whistleblowers alleged told the president and the administration to ignore court orders. And Democrats had big concerns. Republicans pushed ahead with the votes anyway. Booker was talking over Grassley while the votes were happening. Democrats walked out of the room. There were some questions whether the votes were approved in committee since Democrats weren't in there. But the full Senate is going to vote on his nomination, and Republicans are in control, so it's probably going to pass.
One other thing I want to ask you about, especially because I think there could be some headlines coming out of this. NBC News is learning that Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan is expected to be deposed today. This is part, though, of a much broader lawsuit. It alleges that he failed to protect wrestlers from a sexual predator when he was a coach at Ohio State University. Jordan, though, is not the target of this lawsuit, but it is the first time that he's going to be answering questions under oath about it. What can you tell us about this? What are we hearing from Jordan, and what exactly is his piece of this puzzle?
So way before he got into politics, I know you probably know him from being that gangbuster kind of defender for the president on the Hill. He's very aggressive when he chairs hearings. He's a chairman of powerful committees, including the Judiciary Committee in the House currently. And so in this situation, Jordan is not a defendant in this case, but he is going to take the stand. He used to be a wrestling coach decades ago in the late 80s, early 90s at Ohio State University. And there's a situation where wrestlers there, both non-athletes and students, by the way, athletes and students alike, are concerned about these allegations of sexual abuse that happen at the school, particularly to these wrestling students who were wrestling at the school. And Jordan, for his part, a spokesperson, says, as everyone knows, Chairman Jordan never saw or heard of any abuse, and if he had, he would have dealt with it. Jordan has always said that he was not aware that any abuse was going on. Again, he's not in trouble here in terms of being named as a defendant, but he's definitely somebody they have questions for. I assume Jordan is going to stick to that line, though.
Yeah. All right. Julie Sirkin, thanks. Great to have you here in New York with us.
Thank you.
Well, a federal judge is considering an unusual recommendation from the Justice Department. Prosecutors want a one-day sentence for former Louisville police officer Brett Hankison. He was convicted of violating the civil rights of Breonna Taylor during the botched raid that led to her death in 2020. NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley has more on this and a warning. Some of the images you see may be disturbing.
The Justice Department essentially wants no prison time for a conviction that could carry up to life in prison, instead asking for just 1 day for the only person convicted after firing shots into the home of 26-year-old Breonna Taylor. Taylor, an EMT from Louisville killed by police after a controversial 2020 no-knock warrant that's since become illegal in her home state of Kentucky, her death becoming a national outrage, amplifying a call to action at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. Two former Louisville Police Department officers who fired the shots that hit and killed Taylor never faced charges, a decision at the time defended.
The use of force by Mattingly and Cosgrove was justified to protect themselves.
And ridiculed.
Breonna Taylor and her family deserve justice yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Only one officer at that raid went to trial, Brett Hankison.
Defendant Brett Hankison not guilty.
Ultimately found not guilty on 3 state charges, but guilty on a federal charge last November for violating Taylor's civil rights. Prosecutors say Hankison fired 10 shots into Taylor's home, bullets flying through the walls and glass. Those shots from his gun did not hit Taylor. In a new sentencing memo, the Justice Department cites that fact in asking for a 1-day sentence, saying there is, quote, no need for a prison sentence to protect the public from the defendant, adding that the federal conviction will ensure Hankison never serves as a law enforcement officer again, and will also likely ensure that he never legally possesses a firearm again. That memo, submitted by the head of DOJ's Civil Rights Division, initially established by Congress to protect the rights of Black Americans during the Civil Rights era, but has seen a wave of resignations during the Trump administration. And it's now prioritizing alleged violation of Second Amendment gun rights, transgender policies, and anti-Semitism on college campuses, according to internal memos obtained by NBC News in April.
And this division is once again working as it should for all Americans.
Breonna Taylor's family and lawyer did not immediately respond to NBC News' request for comment, but the Democratic congressman in Louisville reacting, saying the 1-day recommendation is, quote, morally reprehensible and deeply insulting, as the focus of civil rights shift in the new administration.
Our thanks to Ryan Riley for that report. Well, sentencing in this case is expected to happen on Monday. Well, this summer, does it not just seem like we have had wave after wave of severe weather? And today's no different. Along the Gulf Coast, the threat from that tropical disturbance, we had our eye on this yesterday. What was downgraded today, but we have still been seeing heavy downpours in parts of the South and the Midwest, and it's triggering flooding in places like Kansas City, Missouri. That's what you're seeing right here on your screen. This is from yesterday. These wet conditions could also continue into the weekend, and this comes as millions of Americans are then feeling the heat today with temperatures soaring across parts of the country. NBC News correspondent George Solis has the latest from waterlogged Louisiana.
Good morning. Residents here in New Orleans and surrounding region breathing a sigh of relief that the tropical moisture that was expected to dump inches and inches of rain was not more severe. Now, it's not to say that some communities did not get hit with several inches of water. In fact, one or two just west of the city here in New Orleans did see some significant flooding, maybe 4, 5, 6 inches. Residents we spoke with say, look, we're expecting this to recede fairly quickly, but the water did linger a little bit longer than they would have liked. Now, moving into the weekend, it's still going to be soggy and hot for millions. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. Yesterday, we also were able to speak with a survivor of that lightning strike in New Jersey who says, fortunately, he does not remember anything, but he did know that victim that passed away. It was very traumatic for him. He's hoping to be home now, recovering from first-degree burns. Again, back here in New Orleans and surrounding region, they are still looking at the potential of some more rain this weekend. So not completely out of the woods, but again, looking around at some of the wet streets here, they're just grateful the flooding here was not more severe. Back to you.
George, thank you so much. Well, now let's turn to NBC meteorologist Angie Lassman for the latest on that heavy rain and the flood risks in the South and the Mid-Atlantic. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, Savannah. Good morning to you. We head into the weekend with more severe potential when it comes to strong storms as well as flooding threats. So here's the lay of the land right now. Notice these scattered storms that are, yes, across parts of the South. We've got a bit in the plains, some of that working across the Ohio Valley. And these are just some locations that we're expecting to see potentially some flooded streets and maybe some stronger storms develop. Right now, 17 million people under these flood alerts stretching from the coast back towards Kentucky. We've got parts of the central Gulf Coast still under these alerts as well. And these are going to last through the day today as we gear up for additional rainfall on those already saturated grounds. So across parts of the South, the Gulf Coast specifically, that's where you'll see the potential for more of that localized flooding that you just heard George talking about. But the Mid-Atlantic and parts of the Southeast are also going to get in on those downpours as well. So we'll see some localized flooding there. Tomorrow, looking ahead to your Saturday, it's the Great Lakes in parts of the Midwest that we'll see dealing with the potential for some of those showers and thunderstorms. Today, the flash flood risk we're most concerned about is centered across the Mid-Atlantic. We've got really saturated grounds from those recent rains, and we've got the potential to see some pretty good rainfall rates in a couple throughout the day per hour. So we could see up to 3 inches per hour. That's a potential just west of Washington, D.C. So heads up for that. This will be something you deal with through the day today. And on top of that, the chance for some stronger storms. We've got all the impacts on the table today for 9 million people. And tomorrow, an even larger chunk of the country is going to deal with those. 41 million people stretching from New York to Iowa, including Detroit, Chicago, Indianapolis, all have the chance to see some of those stronger storms, Savannah. So it'll be another weekend where you'll want to have a way to get those weather alerts because, again, lots on the table.
Such a good point and an important one after what we've seen happen lately.
Yeah.
Angie, thank you so much. Well, we're learning new details in a shocking murder that rocked a small town in May earlier this month. Yesterday, police arrested a teenager in connection with the homicide of a 48-year-old paddleboarder whose body was found at the water's edge. NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin has the latest on the details on the arrest.
A shocking development in the killing of Sunshine Stewart. A 17-year-old male is now in custody in connection with her homicide. The much-loved local was found dead near a campsite in the quiet town of Union, Maine. Police also confirming the 48-year-old was killed by strangulation and blunt force trauma. The news leaving close friend Chloe Keller stunned.
That's inconceivable. I can't imagine being that age and making that choice to harm another human being.
Police say the 17-year-old was arrested without incident in Union late last night. They've yet to release his identity, pointing to his status as a minor, saying in a statement that the teen has been transported to a youth development center in South Portland.
Just for search purposes, she is very experienced on the water with a paddleboard.
According to police, Stewart's body was located during a search of Crawford Pond on July 3rd, last seen paddleboarding the evening before. A public safety official told local newspaper Midcoast Villager Stewart's paddleboard was found by drone on an island called 100 Acre. Her body was next to it where the water met the shore.
When a community that's been safe for time immemorial has its innocence robbed of it, it does shake the foundation of comfort and safety.
What do you want to see happen next?
I think everyone, all of us who knew and loved her, need to gather and be together and celebrate her. She was beloved, profoundly beloved by everyone I knew who knew her.
Erin McLaughlin, NBC News.
Well, next week, Brian Koberger will be sentenced for the stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students after pleading guilty. In anticipation of that, Judge Stephen Hippler has lifted a sweeping gag order in the case. This just happened yesterday. The order banned police, prosecutors, and witnesses from speaking out about the case that captured national attention for 2.5 years. Well, the plea deal shields Kohberger from the death penalty. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas joins us now with more on this. Danny, good morning. So let's start just with more on what lifting this gag order ultimately means. What does it open up in the case? What might we hear?
Here's what it opens up, and here's what it doesn't open up. The gag order prevented litigants from speaking about the case and people associated with them. So now, presumably, if those people want to speak, they can. What it didn't address is something separate but related, the sealing of documents. And there are probably hundreds of documents in the court file that are sealed. The judge is still going to go through those and determine which of them will be unsealed. And that means basically available to the public in the courthouse. Some may remain sealed due to privacy reasons, but in all likelihood, many of those will be unsealed because the default rule, courts are supposed to be public. Sealing is supposed to be the exception, not the rule. So the only thing the gag order does is prevent people from speaking. That's been lifted because there's no chance of tainting any jury because there never will be a jury.
And Danny, what might the judge decide to keep sealed? Why would he make that decision?
I would imagine something that is especially private or something that that might be, under the statutory grounds for sealing, which generally relate to things like privacy or something that is very harmful. It would have to be, I'd have to see the documents or get an idea. But so many have been sealed. And in my personal view, probably too many, even though this is such a gruesome, tragic case. I would expect, this is a second judge now looking at the sealing, I expect there's going to be a lot of documents unsealed, and probably there's going to be only a minority that may remain sealed.
Danny, I'm wondering, you imagine that prior to had this actually gone to trial, it may be good for Kohberger's case that some of this stays sealed, it stays away from public attention. But then I'm also thinking that now that this is the outcome that we're seeing here, that he's taken this plea deal, for the families, do they want more information out there? Do they want to be reliving what happened to their children? Right. Because it's, of course, going to become national conversation if there is anything new in any of this that comes out. What do you take away from that? Who does this sort of help? Who does this hurt? And what might we hear in the coming days?
One of the things this case highlights is that it's long been the rule that families of victims and victims themselves do not control litigation. They can be heard. They have a statutory right to be heard in many states and under some federal laws, but they don't control what the judge does with things like very private or very damaging or hurtful or tragic information that's contained in sealed court files. So while they may be heard, they ultimately cannot control. And this case is a great example because you have families of victims who have very divergent views on things like the level to which Kohberger should have gone to trial or the level to which documents should be made public.
Danny, we're just a few days away from Kohberger's sentencing. What can we expect there?
Virtually nothing in terms of varying from the sentencing. It's pretty much etched in stone. He's going to get multiple consecutive life sentences and then an additional 10 years for the burglary. There appears to be little change. The judge could theoretically vary from that, but probably will not. This will be more important for the opportunity for the victims' families to be heard. And they have not only a statutory right to be heard in Idaho, but a constitutional, state constitutional right to be heard. So I expect we will be hearing from those families, and it will be a very sad day for all.
Danny Savalas, appreciate you following this for us. Thank you. We've got surprising news to tell you about. This coming out of CBS this morning. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert is being canceled, ending its run in May of next year. Colbert made the announcement at the beginning of last night's show. In a statement, the network says it is pulling the plug for financial reasons, but some are questioning the timing after Colbert recently criticized the $16 million settlement CBS parent company Paramount made with President Trump ahead of a pending merger with Skydance. Well, The Late Show debuted with David Letterman, and that was back in 1993.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.